Hello and welcome to the endocrine system, part 2. In this video, we will be discussing the hypothalamus, the pituitary gland, and the parathyroid. So first, we're going to be discussing the hypothalamus. So back when we discussed the nervous system, we had also talked about the hypothalamus. So it's important to understand that there are various parts of the body that belong to more than one body system. For example, the hypothalamus belongs to both the endocrine system and the nervous system. Now, in this video, we will be talking about the hypothalamus's role in the endocrine system, to be specific. So, basically, the hypothalamus controls the endocrine glands and the ANS, which is the autonomic nervous system, which regulates the involuntary functions such as body temperature and blood pressure. So in a past video, we had said that the involuntary functions are functions that we can't control. We can't control blood pressure, we can't control body temperature, so these are involuntary functions. So the main job of the hypothalamus is that it basically stimulates hormones that stimulate the actions of other glands. So the hypothalamus tells other glands to produce hormones to aid the body in some sort of way. So to be specific, the hypothalamus releases GHRH, which is the growth hormone releasing hormone. So this hormone stimulates the production of the growth hormone to allow for growth and development. And it also releases GHIH, which is growth hormone inhibiting hormone, which stops the production of this hormone. There are also tropic hormones that are released that control the release of other hormones. So, as you can see, the hypothalamus controls the releasing of hormones for other glands. Next, we're going to be talking about the pituitary gland. So, the pituitary gland is the master endocrine gland and contains two parts, the anterior pituitary gland and the posterior pituitary gland. So the anterior pituitary gland releases ACTH to stimulate the production of cortisol. So ACTH is the adrenocorticotropic hormone. So this hormone stimulates cortisol to be released, and cortisol is a stress hormone. So this is basically released during times of the sympathetic nervous system, which we discussed in the nervous system playlist. Then, the anterior pituitary releases TSH, which is the thyroid stimulating hormone. So this hormone controls all the thyroid functions and just basically controls the thyroid in general. So then, the anterior pituitary gland produces hormones that stimulate things like melanin, which gives color to our skin. Melanin is basically, again, color cells that get that. So the more amount of melanin you have, the darker your skin is. So the anterior pituitary controls melanin, things like growth and development, and also follicle production. Now, the posterior pituitary, which is the other part of the pituitary gland, produces ADH, which is antidiuretic hormone. So ADH controls basically the second absorption of water in the kidneys. So after all of the basic water is taken in, the posterior pituitary gland produces ADH if needed, if there's more water to be absorbed. Now, the posterior pituitary gland produces oxytocin to stimulate uterus contractions during childbirth. So, as you can see, both parts of the pituitary gland have their own function, and the anterior pituitary has a little bit more of a function than the posterior pituitary. Next, we're going to be talking about the parathyroid gland. Now, as you can see in the little diagram, the parathyroid is essentially located behind or near the thyroid. So, and we talked about the thyroid in the last video. So the parathyroid produces PTH to control calcium levels in the blood. PTH is parathyroid hormone. So this hormone is released when the blood contains lower levels of calcium. Now, in the last video, we had talked about the thyroid, which releases a hormone when there's too much calcium in the blood. So the parathyroid gland takes place when there's little calcium in the blood. So basically, this hormone, PTH, which is, again, parathyroid hormone, causes the bones in the body to essentially break down, the bone tissue to break down, which increases calcium levels in the blood. And it also stimulates the kidneys to hold more calcium and for the intestines to absorb more calcium. So again, the parathyroid gland takes place, or basically has its function released when there's too little calcium in the blood. Question time. Which gland controls the ANS, or the autonomic nervous system? I'll give you 5 seconds. If you said hypothalamus, you are correct. So, as we said earlier, the hypothalamus controls the ANS and stimulates the various glands to produce their hormones. So then we have the thalamus, which controls more of the intellectual functions, as we discussed in the nervous system. Then we have the pituitary and pineal gland. The pineal gland controls the release of melatonin to stimulate the circadian rhythms, which is sleep. So that wouldn't be correct, and that was also taught in the nervous system. And then we have the pituitary gland, which is the master endocrine gland, and does not control the ANS as much as the hypothalamus does. Next question. Which gland produces a hormone that increases calcium levels in the blood? I'll give you 5 seconds. If you said parathyroid, you are correct. So, the parathyroid releases the PTH, which is the parathyroid hormone, to increase calcium levels in the blood. It stimulates the bone tissue to break down, which causes more calcium to get into the blood. It allows the kidneys to retain more calcium, and the intestines to absorb more calcium. So, the goal of the parathyroid is to essentially increase calcium levels in the blood in times of where there is little calcium in the blood. Last question. Which of the following is stimulated by the PTH hormone to increase calcium levels in the blood? I'll give you 5 seconds to answer. If you said C, kidneys hold more calcium, you are correct. So the first choice is water intake increases. So this really has nothing to do with calcium, although the proper water intake is necessary to maintain homeostasis, or balance. Then we have respiratory rate decreases. This has more to do with the respiratory system, which obviously isn't the endocrine system, and really has nothing to do with calcium, so this wouldn't be it. Then we're left with C and D. Kidneys hold more calcium and bones take in more calcium. So D is basically our distractor, because the bones would take in more calcium when there are increased calcium levels in the blood, and we need to decrease the calcium levels. So as we said, for the thyroid produces a thyroid hormone or calcitonin, to allow the bones to take in more calcium to decrease the levels found in the blood. But in this scenario, we are talking about low calcium levels in the blood that need to be increased to maintain homeostasis. This can be done with the PTH hormone, or the parathyroid hormone, that allows the kidneys to hold more calcium to increase the calcium levels in the blood. Thank you so much for watching. Make sure to like and subscribe, and stay tuned for the next video.